I call this meeting back to order. Welcome to meeting number 135 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance, and pursuant to the order of reference on Monday, March 18th, 2024. Motion is adopted on Monday, December 11, 2024. The committee is meeting to discuss Bill C-59, an act to implement certain provisions of the Fall Economic Statement tabled in Parliament on November 21st, 2023, and certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on March 28th, 2023. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to Standing Order 15.1. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the members. Although this room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece worn too close to the microphone, where we therefore ask all participants to exercise a high degree of caution when handling the earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on, in order to prevent incidents and safeguard the hearing health of interpreters. I invite participants to ensure that they speak into the microphone into which their headset is plugged in, and to avoid manipulating the earbuds by placing them on the table away from the microphone when they are not in use. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. All virtual witnesses for this meeting have been tested, and the clerk has said everything's okay. So off we go. And we have here today with us as an individual, we have Vivek Daheja, who's an associate professor of economics and philosophy at Carleton University. Welcome. Also, as an individual, we have Stephanie Wu Dearden, who's a registered psychotherapist, who's with us via video conference. From Electricity Canada, Vice President of Government Relations, Michael Powell is with us. Welcome. As well as joining Mr. Powell is Derek Smith, who's the Vice President of Emera Inc. and Corporate Tax. And that will be through video conference. And from Everwind Fuels, we have Trent Vichy, who's the Chief Executive Officer. So on that, we will start with Mr. Daheja, please, for opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I was last year before this committee last fall, I had warned that Canada stood at a crossroads. That is as true now as it was then. If anything, there's greater urgency to fix the problems that ail us. GDP growth per capita, the basic measure of the well-being of the average Canadian, is stagnating. GDP per person is basically where it was a decade ago. In other words, we've had a lost decade here in Canada. In 1960, our average income per person was the same as the U.S. Now we have less than 3/4 the income per person south of the border. Unemployment in Canada, when I wrote these notes, I said it's just below. Now we're actually above 6%, 6.1%, and could go to 7% or higher. In the U.S., it's below 4%. U.S. growth and productivity continue to be strong. Ours in Canada seem to have flatlined. What's driving this increasing divergence between the U.S. and Canada, making us significantly poorer than our friends south of the border? A key driver is investment. It's a key driver of growth in income productivity. In the late 1990s, gross fixed capital formation, just a fancy word for investment, as a share of GDP was about 7%. Today it's down to about 3%. In 2013, gross fixed capital formation per worker in Canada was about 90% of the U.S. We're now down to 2/3 of the U.S. Why is this happening? Put simply, increased government spending is crowding out private investment. Government now accounts for about 1/4 of Canada's GDP. It's staggering. Think about that. 1/4 of our economy is socialized. Well, total business investment is now only 8%. No wonder that the latest numbers show that labor productivity in Canada shrank by more than 0.5 percentage point last quarter, while in the U.S. it grew by 2.5% approximately. We are in serious trouble, but don't take my word on it. Recently, Bank of Canada Senior Deputy Governor Carolyn Rogers went so far as to say that low productivity growth in Canada is, quote, an emergency, and, quote, it's time to break the glass. Of course, the Bank of Canada has also done its share to add to our current woes. As I've testified previously before this committee, the pandemic saw explosive growth in the money supply as the central bank monetized fiscal deficits, financed by sovereign debt, in other words, quantitative easing. That is what gave us the inflation crisis and now cripplingly high interest rates that are making life impossibly difficult for many Canadians. What's to be done? As I testified last fall, we need to go back to basics. The three pillars of economic policy are fiscal policy, monetary policy, and regulation. They're all badly in need of repair. We've had a fiscal binge in Canada. Monetary policy, likewise, has been on the bender. The economy is overregulated, stifling innovation, new business creation, private sector investment, and creating high entry barriers for new entrants. As a consequence, our economy is highly concentrated with a handful of dominant, politically powerful, and entrenched incumbent firms in all major sectors, everything from cell phone services to groceries to legacy media to banking to airlines, you name it. With such heavy concentration and lack of competition, it's no wonder that we pay higher prices and get poorer service than our friends in the US for just about everything. And just to finish, it's time to cure ourselves of the addiction to fiscal and monetary excesses and take a chainsaw to burdensome regulation, to paraphrase the new president of Argentina. It's worth recalling that at the beginning of the 20th century, Argentina had about the same per capita income as the US and Canada. But after 120 years of economic mismanagement, their income is now only 1/3 that of the US. And as I said, ours is now actually less than 3/4. Unless we mend our ways, we risk going the way of Argentina. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Dahija. And now we'll hear from Ms. Dearden, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, my name is Stephanie Wu Dearden. I am a registered psychotherapist practicing from London, Ontario. I'm here to be a witness to the parts of Bill C-59 that pertain to the Excise Tax Act and amending it to expand the GST-HST exemption to services rendered to professional individuals by certain health practitioners to include psychotherapists and counseling therapists. I am happy and grateful to be here not only because I get to speak on this issue, but I understand that this moment of this committee considering and researching this legislation means a lot to psychotherapists, counseling therapists, and allies who have been asking the Canadian government to remove this unfair tax since 2004. So I, along with my professional peers and colleagues, am heartened that the Canadian government has listened and finally taken action on this matter after this time. Firstly, psychotherapy and counseling therapy are the same profession with a different name based on provincial preference. I call myself a psychotherapist rather than a counseling therapist because I reside in Ontario and am registered with the College of Registered Psychotherapists. If I were to move to Nova Scotia, the equivalent professional and regulatory body there would be the College of Counseling Therapists. Same profession, different name. Our profession has met the criteria of being regulated in at least 5 different provinces and territories to be included in the Excise Tax Act among healthcare professionals. I am not an expert in tax law, so I will be commenting based on my experience as a psychotherapist and what I see in my practice. Psychotherapy and counseling therapy can be an integral part of an individual's overall health. Our bodies don't experience physical health and mental health as separate. There have been documented links between depression and inflammation, implicating the immune system, the HPA axis, which is our body stress response system, and tumor genesis in cancer, cortisol release, and Crohn's disease, just to name a few. A healthcare system that divides between physical healthcare and mental health care is what we are familiar with, but health involves supporting and nourishing both aspects within us. Examples from my practice involve working with individuals living with conditions such as endometriosis, adenomyosis, cancer, Crohn's disease, and thyroid disease. I have seen in sessions the way psychological and socio-emotional pain contribute to physical symptoms that aggravate my client's experience of these conditions. Addressing this pain in a therapeutic, safe, compassionate way can lead to tension release, ability to regulate emotions, the ability to step out of isolation, to connect with community, to ask for help, and to advocate for oneself in the healthcare system. It's by no means a cure, but it allows my clients to live with a better quality of life. Removing this tax on counseling therapy and psychotherapy signals that the Canadian government understands that the health of Canadians encompasses physical health care and mental health care, and that this understanding is written in policy. From a business and consumer perspective, amending the Excise Tax Act to include psychotherapists and counseling therapists allows choice and fairness for Canadians seeking psychotherapy. Currently, social workers, occupational therapists, and nurses are among the practitioners that can provide psychotherapy services and refer to themselves as psychotherapists and are exempt from charging GST or HST. It is ironic that counseling therapists and psychotherapists who have specifically trained to practice psychotherapy have to charge tax on their services. If a Canadian is living in a rural setting where a psychotherapist or counseling therapist is their main option for accessing mental health care, they would have to pay HST. This puts them in an unfair situation compared to an urban counterpart who may have their pick between professionals registered to different professional regulatory bodies and can choose one charging a lower fee and doesn't charge tax. This person in an urban setting, in our example, gets to keep an extra $10 to $20 in their pocket per session compared to someone who's living in this rural setting and seeing a counseling therapist or psychotherapist. If both these individuals see a therapist biweekly, that would be an extra $240 to $480 saved over a year for our urban resident. There are many things they can do with that money, getting more sessions if they need it. So in my view, this exemption is also about fairness for Canadians seeking mental health services across the country. There's more I can say on this, but I am sensitive to my time. MPs from multiple major political parties have written op-eds and made statements declaring this tax to be unfair. So I think that it is straightforward going forward that amending the Excise Tax Act to include psychotherapists and counseling therapists is one step the Canadian government can take to make mental health care more accessible to Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Dearden, and I'm sure the members will have many questions. Thank you for opening remarks. Now we'll hear from Electricity Canada, and we have Mr. Michael Powell with us here in the room, and we also, he'll be delivering remarks, and Derek Smith, who is remote, is also with the organization.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Electricity Canada is the national voice for the electricity sector. Our members generate, transmit, and distribute electricity in every province and territory. As the Chair said, joining me today is Derek Smith. He's VP Corporate Tax at Emera, and he may be better suited to answer some of your more technical questions, because I'm not a tax expert. Nova Scotia will be impacted by the EIPL provisions included in C-59. Since 2005, the electricity sector has cut emissions in half, and today Canada's grid is over 84% non-emitting. That's among the cleanest in the world. Our sector has been responsible for the majority of emissions reductions in Canada and will be the engine that powers a net zero economy in 2050. The task to getting there will not be easy. Estimates project that we will need to generate 2 or 3 times more electricity than we currently do today. That growth must be done without compromising reliability of our system or the affordability of energy bills for Canadians. C-59 is an important piece of legislation that helps enable that balance. In particular, the clean technology and CCUS ITCs in C-59 are essential pieces of the puzzle. To this end, federal investments enable the competitive build-out of electricity infrastructure while reducing the burden on Canadian ratepayers. That being said, we've identified a few little adjustments to these ITCs that we think would help ensure they have the maximum intended impact. That includes expanding eligibility to allow commercial trusts to access the clean tech ITC and ensure their projects are held held by these trusts are competitive, adjusting the draft definition of SMRs in the Clean Tech ITC to those that are no more than 1,200 megawatts of thermal energy per reactor core, and then extending the full 50% value of the CCUS ITC until 2035, recognizing that delays on its deployment and the final clean electricity regulations have impacted project timelines. It's equally important that other ITCs, including the Clean Electricity ITC, are moved forward to deployment as quickly as possible. We look forward to more details on that in the very near future. While these are provisions that help enable an affordable, reliable, and clean electricity grid, there are provisions that serve as a barrier to these objectives. As outlined in our submitted brief, the excessive interest and financing expenses limitation, or EIFEL, will inadvertently impact energy affordability for Canadians in various parts of the country and restrict the capital intended to build projects supporting net zero. The intent of these rules is to align with the OECD's BEPS project. This is a positive step forward towards fostering a fair global tax framework and something that we support. However, as some regulated gas and electric utilities are federally taxable and have some assets outside of Canada, they will be subject to the EIFEL rules, while others will not. For example, those of provincial crown corporations. Due to this structure and the way rates are set, the utilities impacted by EIFEL will see increased costs passed to customers from interest on all existing and new debt. We understand that broad sectoral exemptions could run counter to the spirit of the legislation, so we propose a targeted public interest exemption for regulated energy utilities and their holding companies. This approach is consistent with that of our peers, including the United States, Ireland, and the United Kingdom, and is consistent with the OECD recommendation that these rules not apply to public benefit infrastructure. Such an exemption is appropriate for our sector, as rate-regulated utilities are unique for several reasons. First, as highly regulated, capital-intensive industry, we must maintain high levels of debt to ensure that costs to customers are spread over the life of a project. The debt level of a utility could be 50 or 60% of their capital structure, and they are prescribed to the utilities by regulators. Second, regulated utilities are subject to a significant amount of scrutiny and control by provincial regulators in Canada. In this vein, every dollar a regulated utility spends or charges to a customer must go through a transparent and accountable process. Third, due to their regulatory structure, utilities must pass on certain costs to customers, including taxes paid. Importantly, EIFEL will create a patchwork that will affect Canadians' energy bills differently across the country based on the taxable status and ownership of their local utility. We've outlined this in a map that was included in part of our submission. Based on where you can't choose as a customer of a gas or electric utility to move to a different spot without moving. You have no choice about the utility you have. And so based on where you live, creating winners and losers with EIFEL will create a patchwork of energy affordability, winners and losers, and that's not something that anyone wants. We believe a target exemption will ensure fairness and avoid increasing energy bills for Canadians at a time when cost of living concerns are on the rise. And that's why we would encourage, in this case, a sectoral exemption on the EIFEL rules. Thank you, and we look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. And now we'll hear from the CEO of Everwind Fuels, Trent Vichy, please.
Mr. Chair and honourable members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Trent Vichy. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Everwind Fuels, Canada's most advanced green hydrogen development. For the last 2 years, we've invested over $200 million of capital to push our forward project. And last week, we were pleased to announce the completion of our front-end engineering design, which marked a major milestone in the development of the project and development of the technical and engineering requirements to build the project. In short, we're a significant supporter of the government's initiatives to move forward in terms of reducing carbon emissions and see hydrogen as a crucial part of this work. As you hear from our comments, the swift passage of the investment tax credits first announced in the 2022 full economic statement are a crucial part of bringing these projects to life. The swift passage of the ITC legislation is important for two. Firstly, to provide certainty to invest, and secondly, the passage of the legislation also allows other parts of the government and the administration of ITCs, namely the Canadian Revenue Agency and Natural Resources Canada, to roll out the administrative aspects which are crucial to the effectiveness of the investment tax credits. Some of the areas are highly technical and need to be integrated with the engineering work. So that leads to sort of a need for speed on that. Today, I'm here to provide a perspective on Bill C-59, which implements certain provisions of the 2023 Fall Economic Statement. Specifically, we'll focus on our comments on the Clean Technology Investment Credit. First off, we're pleased that the federal government has introduced a robust suite of policies to ensure Canada remains globally competitive jurisdiction when it comes to clean energy. The fulsome set of ITCs and other public policy tools give Canada the opportunity to be an investment destination of choice and a leader in this sector. However, to truly seize this first mover advantage, we must be swift and decisive in our public policy actions. The global race to provide clean energy to the world is on, and the competition is fierce, and we have the opportunity to make Canada a leader in this space. The US Inflation Reduction Act must be met on an equal or more robust policy response, and the ITCs play a key role in this. With this context, we want to highlight two important commitments made in the Fall Economic Statement. Firstly, a timeline was laid out with regard to enactment of certain clean investment tax credits. And for Everwind, the timeline around the clean hydrogen ITC was crucial, along with the introduction of legislation for the clean technology ITCs through Bill C-59. Second, the Fall Economic Statement proposed clarity regarding the effect of repayable loans from Crown corporations and other public authorities on the investment tax credits. Everwind closed a $125 million loan with the Export Development Corporation Canada in late November 2023, and this proposal provides certainty that the loan will not delay the availability of various clean investment tax credits. We look forward to seeing this measure in the forthcoming bill. With that background, the introduction of the legislation for the Clean Technology Investment Tax Credit is therefore most welcome, including the mechanism for labour conditions, which we wholeheartedly support. As a general comment, the refinements from the August draft legislation are welcome and are also consistent with the original framework announced in the 2022 Fall Economic Statement. My message to parliamentarians is simple. We need the legislation that will activate these ITCs to be passed without delay. The Clean Energy ITC and the Clean Hydrogen ITC will help ensure Canadian green energy projects can develop with greater speed and certainty and can be cost competitive on a global stage. As I mentioned earlier, Everwind has invested nearly $200 million in our projects to date to establish North America's most advanced clean energy hub in the Atlantic Canadian region. We're the only project in the Western Hemisphere to have completed FEED engineering, which shows that Canada can lead the way. But we need all of the public policy tools to be fulsome and operational to really seize this opportunity in front of us. As we are in advanced discussions on offtake, full certainty and accessibility of the investment tax credits will enable signing of binding offtake agreements and the financial close, project financing, and final investment decision of our multi-million-dollar project this year, with production at the end of 2025. As we indicated in our consultation submissions, we have full certainty in the design and functionality of these ITCs, and will provide greater commercial certainty and establish Canada as a global green energy leader. I'll conclude by saying that the global energy movement towards green energy is rapidly accelerating, and it's a critical time for the federal government to determine whether Canada will be a leader or a follower in the future energy economy. That is why we need to ensure that the Clean Technology ITC and others are in place as quickly as possible. There's not a moment to waste in this fierce global race. Thank you again for your time. Merci beaucoup, and look forward to questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Vici. Thank you for opening remarks. It's good to see you again. The last time we were together was in Halifax when our committee was on pre-budget consultation, and good to hear your progress. Members and witnesses, we're moving into our rounds of questions now. We are starting with, this will be 6 minutes per party to ask questions, and we're starting with MP Lawrence for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll get 2 rounds, will we? I believe so. Yes.
If we don't have other interruptions, yes, then we may get through 2 rounds. Yeah.
Very good. I'm going to start with Mr. Smith. Actually, the EIFEL restrictions. I think Mr. Powell, you gave a great overview with respect to the cost it'll add and the fact that it's out of step with the BEPS project, where exemptions were given in the UK pay for utilities. And but my concern and my interest is actually for the folks in this case Nova Scotia, but all Canadians, as to the ever increasing price of energy, whether that be through the carbon tax or now through the EIFEL. Mr. Smith, could you talk to the potential increase to the end user that the EIFEL restrictions will put on the additional consumers?
Yes, so can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So if I speak specifically, I'll use example in Nova Scotia. So the Nova Scotia utility, Nova Scotia Power, would anticipate over the next 3 years of incremental cost of combined 50 million over that 3-year period as a result of denied interest. So i.e. our tax cost will increase and thus bills to customers will increase. If we get granular on that and drill it down to the residential customer, we're looking at about $25 per year per customer bill over a 3-year period. And that's about a 1% rate increase for the individual residential customer.
Thank you for that, Mr. Smith. So we see the impact in our economy and on consumers of the ever-increasing carbon tax. The carbon tax is increasing inflation now by a third, by 0.8, driving up the cost of nearly everything. The PBO recently said that the vast majority of Canadians will pay far more in when you take into account both the economic and fiscal restraint. I'm going to go to you, Vivek, what impact does the increasing cost of energy have on the Canadian economy, or any economy for that matter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it really has knock-on effects through every sector of the economy, because given our geography and given that just about everything has to be delivered, transported, food, people have to drive long distances. So there's no one, even an urban city dweller like myself who lives close to Parliament and doesn't have a car. We're all going to be paying higher prices because everything is going to become more expensive. And don't forget, it's in the context of already high interest rates. So that's really a double whammy, that prices are high. We all have debt and servicing that debt. And I should add, interestingly, that debt, that interest costs are not actually part of the CPI. So we're missing a big piece of inflation, and energy costs are just adding to the burden for the average person, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And then from a macroeconomic standpoint, if we look at we're in a global marketplace, of course, and attracting capital is incredibly important. In fact, I believe the OECD said that Canada will be last in terms of capital investment over the next 40 years. That's the projection. What type of impact the increased cost through additional regulation and additional, in this case, taxation on energy, what type of impact will it have?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. That will certainly deter investment, both domestic and foreign. And I shared the numbers with you in my opening remarks relative to the U.S., which is our benchmark. We've got woefully insufficient investment, and if we're going to increase regulations, increase the cost of investing, that's going to deter investors from parking their money or investing in various sectors of the economy, including energy, for sure.
As Deputy Governor Carolyn Rogers says, we're in a productivity crisis, and from my standpoint, or my opinion, would be that the increasing the cost of energy would hurt productivity even further. Isn't this the exact opposite type of action that Carolyn Rogers, Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, was asking for?
Yeah, I agreed. And I must say, I was struck by the fact that as a central banker, she was extremely candid and used very stark language. Indeed, as I said, my remarks, we're overregulated, we're overtaxed. We've had a monetary and fiscal binge, and we're in trouble. We need to boost productivity. Otherwise, as I warned, Argentina and Canada and the U.S. had the same per capita income 120 years ago. They're now a third of the U.S. They're a poor country, or middle-income country. And we are now significantly poorer than our friends south of the border, and low productivity and low investment is a big cause of that, Mr. Chair.
And so just in terms of, so those who are proponents of the carbon tax would say that it works by pushing, making non-fossil fuel things less expensive and making fossil fuel products more expensive. But when you increase the cost of a 84% clean energy source like electricity. Does that not undermine the theory of the carbon tax pricing?
Yes, I agree, Mr. Chair. In a perfect textbook world that we teach our first-year students, yes, there's a case for a carbon tax. If you want to reduce something, you make it costlier, you add a tax, called a Pigouvian tax, but we're far from that textbook world. We don't even know that we've set the tax rate correctly to begin with. There are knock-on effects in other sectors, and it is also very poorly timed, given that the cost of living is already skyrocketing. And lastly, of course, the problem is global. We can't solve the problem here in Canada.
Thank you, MP Lawrence. And then we'll go to MP Thompson.
Thank you, and certainly welcome to all of the witnesses. And Mr. Vici, I welcome you to committee, and I'm so pleased the advancements that you've been able to make in a short period of time. And I certainly am pleased with the news out of Newfoundland and Labrador today with World Energy and their green light to keep moving. And I think that really speaks to the work that's happening in Canada, but certainly in Atlantic Canada on green energy and global green energy, and how I feel government is really supporting that work. And thank you for highlighting that in your opening comments. And if we could just drill down on that for a few moments, it's certainly as it relates to investment tax credits. Could you again speak to why it is so important that we move Bill C-59 forward, why this legislation is so important?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're starting to develop a new industry like green hydrogen, you really need the support of government once we start to make this product, we will make it cheaper, more efficient, and more quickly. And it's important to publish this investment now because history and businesses and economies have shown that where you push these clean energy hub is where that you tend to get more investment over time. So we have an opportunity today to actually really place Canada at the center of this new industry. And so it's very supported by critical minerals, the clean energy, decarbonisation. And going forward, you will see companies attracted to the region because they will want clean, green hydrogen to make all kinds of products, like chemicals, steel, etc. Now is the time. And developing these projects is like a freight train. Like, it requires so much coordination and so much effort. And you've seen a few proponents step forward and really take risk on bringing these businesses to life. And like the decision today from Newfoundland is really welcome. It shows Canada being supportive and a real leader in this space. So now is the time.
Thank you. And I said earlier today, the economic, the climate is real, the climate change is real, but there is an economic opportunity here. Could you just speak again to how the investment tax credit creates certainty in the industry? Because I think that's really important for us to clearly understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that the investment tax credit creates certainty is by reducing the overall cost to the market. It's important when you're there's the carrot and stick. So you have the stick of carbon taxes, etc. This is the carrot on the production side to drive these investments forward. And this is, I would say, critical to getting these investments going. It's critical to starting the process of delivering efficiencies and scale. Like, this is a huge problem that we need to solve, and establishing these industries is imperative today, I believe.
Thank you. How are the ITCs an example of Canada leveraging a competitive advantage with renewable energy resources?
So Canada has has a very good wind regime, so it has very good renewable generation capacity, and so combining that capacity with the ITCs puts Canada in a leading position. There are other parts of the world that are looking to be leaders in this space as well, including the Middle East, Australia, South America, and other parts of the world. And like these businesses will find like you will see the industry develop. And in terms of starting this process along, what it does is it plants a seed to build the scale in the region, kind of like the seed that goes to, eventually grows into an oak tree. You need to invest and give it time and be an early leader.
Thank you. If I could switch for a moment, I think I still have some time. Move to Ms. Wu Dearden. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I'm sorry if I haven't. Thank you for your opening comments. And I want to ask you around your role as a psychotherapist within multidisciplinary care, particularly mental health services, and mental health obviously being part of healthcare. I sat on a committee yesterday for perinatal mental health, and I certainly see your services as part of that step care approach to ensuring that there are many doors and the appropriate door at the right time for people who have mental health concerns, and then what the GST exemption, what that does in terms of enabling more people to be able to avail of this very important service.
Thank you for your comments.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Would you like to comment on the role that you play in that multidisciplinary, really primary care approach to healthcare and mental health being part of healthcare?
You're on mute. Yes.
I'm a psychotherapist in private practice, so I see people who are coming from different segments of the healthcare system. I would comment that they are interlinked, but right now I exist in a fractured system, so I do my best. But what we see in terms of improving and addressing mental health care, socio-emotional care, relational care, it directly impacts people on a physical health level. And you were talking about perinatal, so we're talking about people and the life that they are carrying and their ability to care for that newborn when they come into the world. And so that's not impacting just one person, but their whole system. So that's why I think it is of utmost importance right now, and removing this tax would help access the mental health care that is so important at that stage of someone's life.
Thompson, and now we're going to go to MP Sébastien Lemire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais poser ma question.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to pose my question to the witness from Electricity Canada and the EIFEL issue, which of course makes it much more difficult to use tax havens. The OECD has recommended this in order to dampen down fiscal evasion, tax evasion, particularly when used for public utility companies. This would put them in danger. We're trying to understand which companies are going to be impacted in Nova Scotia, for example. The small nuclear units, for example, would that apply in that case as well?
We've provided a map as part of our submission, which gets into where individual electricity companies are impacted. So the primary areas are in Nova Scotia, as Derek outlined, but also in Alberta and in parts of BC, and then it sort of depends where that is. The current, as an example, it wouldn't impact Crown corporations like Ontario Power Generation, who has the most advanced small modular reactor program, but in the future, other ones that may consider building one that might be rate regulated would be impacted. And just to the point on the OECD, this is a good process. It is the kind of thing that Canada should be pursuing. But what's happened is that in a very broad net, we're getting caught as bycatch, and there's an unintended consequence which will have an impact on individual Canadians in some provinces when it gets to their bill. And we just think that, as our counterparts in the United States and the United Kingdom and Ireland have found, it makes the most sense from an affordability perspective just to carve out rate-regulated utilities for the reasons I outlined, which is that they're already very regulated, that dollars are affirmed by a local regulator and spent in Canada, and there is that public interest element when it comes to energy affordability.
Pouvez-vous nous expliquer la relation?
Could you explain the relationship between the Canadian corporations, the PPPs, 3P? Are we talking about major private energy companies here?
Pouvez-vous répéter la question?
Can you explain the relationship between the central mother Canadian companies who will create subsidiaries or affiliates in order to, I think you have the question now, or are we talking strictly on private companies here?
Company, though, the exemption we're looking for is those that operate in Canada in a regulated utility market. Derek, I think, would probably be best positioned to talk about sort of the relationship between parent company and local affiliate, because given the nature of Emera Nova Scotia Power.
Yeah, so the rules effectively come into play for parent companies that hold private utilities in Canada, but also have investments in foreign operations, be that utilities or non-utility. And so there is costs that are at the parent company that effectively are borne by the parent, but influence what happens down at the regulated utility level. But again, this isn't a pure Canadian concept. It applies to the extent that you have foreign investment above a de minimis amount of $5 million.
Pouvez-vous expliquer en quoi votre proposition?
Can you explain how you might help your industry without covering up anything that is proposed by an international company?
In where our push for the exemption is, which is just on regulated utilities in Canada, so on the gas and the electric side. These are companies that work through provincial regulatory processes like the Régie in Quebec or the Utility Board in Nova Scotia, where they have to get capital and spending plans approved by the regulator. There is a tremendous amount of public scrutiny involved in that. And that way, the dollars are being spent in Canada with that public interest measure put in, and that's how we've worked backwards. And I think when you scope things in that very narrow box, you can help address the unintended affordability challenge that comes with the EIFEL rules as they are, while making sure that you're meeting the overall objectives of the BEPS process.
Je me permets une dernière question en lien avec le.
A final question, if I may. What safeguards would your position have? Now, I'm very preoccupied with tax havens, whether nuclear or gas. Do we really wish to avoid that they might take? Can we do special conditions for these?
Can I help with that, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely, Derek.
Yeah, sure. So the proposed legislation draft change that Electricity Canada put forth focus very specifically on not just a general exemption, but the exemption is for specific debts. And so those debts need to be traced under the typical classical interest deductibility tracing principle. You need to trace those debts to a good purpose. And that good purpose is that it's related to a regulated utility that sets rates through a regulator, and that the proceeds of those debts are used indirectly or directly in that utility business.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci, MP Lemire. And now to MP Davies, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to all the witnesses, thank you for your testimony here today. Ms. Wu-Dearden, I'd like to start with you. In 2021, my colleague Lindsay Matheson introduced Bill C-218 that legislation would exempt psychotherapeutic services delivered by psychotherapists and counselors from the GST-HST almost 3 years ago. Ms. Wu-Durden, I understand that she was inspired to introduce that important piece of legislation because you asked her to take action on the issue. So I want to thank you for your advocacy on this. Because of your tireless advocacy and that of your colleagues, the government has agreed to include the provisions of Bill C-218 in the fall economic statement, as you know, and the implementation legislation is before us today. I think it's a good news story when it shows citizens working positively and influencing policy. Now, we've heard clearly the positive impacts that this measure will have on clients from you and others already today. I'm curious how the elimination of the GST and HST on counseling therapy and psychotherapy will impact the overall healthcare system in your view.
Thank you for your comments and for your recognition there. That's a big question, by the way. So, as you said,
So,
it's just in my view. There's a symbolic aspect that indicates that mental health care, psychotherapy, counseling therapy is on par with other healthcare professions, such as seeing a physiotherapist, an acupuncturist, a podiatrist. So it destigmatizes it for Canadians, in addition to the money that they save from the taxes that they would have to pay. So if there has been found that the rate that psychotherapists and counseling therapists charge ranges between $120 maybe to $190. So 10 to 13% savings each session could be a couple $100 a year for each Canadian. And that could mean that money goes towards something important to them in their life. It could mean more sessions for them if they need it. So this will be a big impact on the healthcare system.
in my previous role as health critic, I saw data from British Columbia that showed that of the top 10 reasons people go into emergency rooms, the top 4 had to do with mental health issues. And so I'm just wondering if you think that this measure will have a bit of a knockoff effect by preventing, if people get the therapy they need, perhaps that may actually have the salutary effect of keeping them out of emergency rooms. Do you see that as being a potential consequence?
I think that many of us can agree here that health is not just the absence of illness. And I think psychotherapy and counseling therapy is a big part of helping people stay in that healthy place.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, the title of this provision in the C-59 and the way it's described is that it's referred to as excessive interest and financing expenses limitation. Now, so it seems like a pretty positive thing. I mean, I don't think any of us are in favor of excessive interest and excessive financing expenses. So it seems as a description that we would be motivated to want to limit that. Is that an improper description of this provision in your view? Or how does your industry, because you clearly don't want it to apply to your particular sector or industry. I'm just curious, does your industry need excessive interest and excessive financing expenses, or is that just a misnomer in your view?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for our industry, it's probably a misnomer. It doesn't align well. I think if you look at our business, it's regulated to have certain amounts of debt, certain amounts of equity, and that's to keep the cost of energy affordable for customers. And it just so happens that the amount of debt is significant relative to other industries. When the debt is high, it spreads the cost of projects over time. So we're not collecting monies from customers up front. We're collecting it over time. At the same time, by keeping the equity low, it restricts the amount of return or profits that are available for the shareholder. So reality is when we work our numbers through, the rules don't necessarily work for our industry. Hence why we have utilities within Electricity Canada members that are having interest denied under the rules.
I see. Mr. Vichy, in a statement in response to the 2023 Fall Economic Statement, you said the following. We are pleased to see that Canada continues to provide a comprehensive and effective policy response to the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. Today's Fall Economic Statement makes progress in key areas vital for developing Canada's clean energy sector. Specifically, greater clarity on eligibility and timing for the Clean Technology ITC and Clean Hydrogen ITC will help ensure Canada attracts the investment and talent needed to be a global leader in clean energy. I think you've emphasized that message here today. Now, draft legislative proposals for the introduction of Canada's Clean Hydrogen Investment Tax Credit and the Clean Technology Manufacturing ITC were released for public consultation in December. Could you provide this committee with an overview of Everwind Fuels' response to those draft proposals?
Yeah, so I think broadly what was provided was I'd say fairly good, but there were a few things that I would say perhaps were missing. And one, for example, is when you build, for example, a wind farm, significant investment goes into sort of building roads and like access ways. And for example, the cost of that was excluded, which actually sort of plays into the importance of labour as part of developing these types of projects. So I think that that was one particular area that that we would like to emphasise. The other is without getting into too much minutiae, we just it's important for us to the administrative aspects of this once the bill is passed. I don't want to. It's a lot of work to actually get the details right, and passing of the bill allows NRCan and the CRA to really drive this forward. And these are billions of dollars of projects and project financing and legal work, etc. So that probably the biggest key message is to drive the bill forward and not delay, because it's, as I said before, it's like a freight train to get these projects moving and coordinated to deliver.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Davies. Members, I'm just looking at the clock. We have very little time left, but you know what? Every party will have an opportunity to have one more question. So we'll start with MP Chambers. Yeah, we got about 5 minutes left, so a minute-ish as we have.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Roll back the time.
In my minute, I will just clarify a couple questions with Mr. Powell and his colleague. The bill in its current form, if passed, would that result in an increase in energy bills for residents in Nova Scotia? Yes or no?
Yes. Derek?
Yes.
Are you aware of any amendments currently being considered that would fix these problems?
We've proposed amendments in our submission, but I'm unsure if one of you is interested in advancing it. We'd be happy to chat about it if so.
Okay. In the 15 seconds I have left, I'll provide verbal notice of a motion, and out of respect for my new colleague from the NDP and the non-permanent member from the bloc, I won't move it. But in respect of amendments to Bill C-59 ruled in order and substantive by the chair, that clause by clause for these respective clauses be paused until such time officials present testimony on these amendments, that the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, President of the Treasury Board, or, I'm not being greedy here, or the Minister of National Revenue appear for 1 hour to answer the committee's questions. However, that in order to be expeditious with the bill, that this does not prevent other clauses from being reviewed out of order. If there are substantive amendments coming to this bill, we need to examine them with the proper testimony. We have been shortchanged access to the CRA officials and other officials at the very beginning of this study. So that is the motion that has now been tabled in public. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Chambers, and now we'll go to MP Zerwitz.
Is this for my 1 minute?
Yeah, 2 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so look, what I'm going to say is first, thanks to all the witnesses. Thank you. Very important testimony. You've been heard. I want to say special thank you to us, Ms. Dearden. I will tell you, since I've been elected over 8 years ago, Davenport residents have been asking me for the elimination of the HST on therapy services, and I'll tell you they did a happy dance when the fall economic statement was read. I'd also say thank you for your testimony, Mr. Powell. Heard you loud and clear in terms of what your ask is, and Professor Dahija. I was a little bit, I wish I had more time with you because I wouldn't mind talking to you a little bit about some of the information that came out from the 200 economists last week that talked about, they disclaimed the myth about carbon pricing driving up the cost of living as a major cost of inflation. What the evidence has shown, they said, is Canadian carbon pricing has a negligible impact on overall inflation. They also disclaimed the myth that carbon pricing harms Canadian business competitiveness. They said that what the evidence showed that Canada's carbon pricing scheme is designed to help businesses reduce emissions at a low cost while competing in an emerging low carbon global economy. And I would say to you that we do have a growth issue, we have a productivity issue, we have a competitiveness issue. It's not an issue that happened over the last 8 years. It's been an issue that has accumulated over 30 years. And our government, I'm very proud, has taken a number of steps to try to address the competition issue. We've tried to address the productivity issue. We've introduced a national childcare program, among many other things that we've done. We have a lot more work to do, and I'm hopeful that in Budget 2024, we'll see some more of those measures that will show how we will be prosperous moving forward in the 21st century. Thank you so much.
MP Zerwitz, there's no time for a response, but if you can, you could submit Mr. Dahija to the committee if you would like to provide a written response to the committee. But I have to move on. I have to go to MP Lemire, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to address my question. Ms. Dearden, we heard from another expert this morning. Do you think that all professionals offering similar services in Quebec or elsewhere in Canada be eligible for the same exemptions? And if there was any difficulty in interpreting their status, we have to have a body that would perhaps resolve the difference of opinion.
Merci pour votre question. Je connais pas très bien ce qui se passe au Québec, notamment avec la diversité des professionnels en santé mentale. Je ne peux pas répondre à votre question.
You mentioned that to exempt the tax on the importance, and there would be repercussions for the sector. But a province has to have this exemption qualified by another province because whether it's Nova Scotia or Quebec, they'll want to do me too. So do you think that would be unfair?
Si une entité québécoise pratique la psychothérapie ou la thérapie de conseil, et qu'on constate qu'elle a la même portée que dans une autre province, elle serait
in this amendment.
C'est ce qu'il faudra tenter de créer. Merci beaucoup.
Well, I think we'd have to create such a body then. Thank you.
Davies, you will have the final questions to our witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Vichy, I think your testimony is pretty clear that you think these incentives will have a positive effect on investment in the clean tech and hydrogen industries in Canada. I'm wondering briefly if you can, help us understand the magnitude of that, the quantity of investment we might expect from this, or do you have a specific example that you could point us to that you're aware of that might be an impact of this measure?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first phase, for example, of our project in Nova Scotia, which is just the start, is about $2.5 billion. The economic impact on GDP is about $2 billion. government revenues, it's like, close to $1 billion. And this is like a small start, okay? And so the EA that was approved for the project in Newfoundland today, these are multi-billion-dollar projects. So like this is absolutely meaningful. This is probably the greatest, or one of the best clean growth economic initiatives for the Maritimes region. So I don't understate how this is in terms of like driving growth. It's like turning the Maritimes region into the Houston or Texas or the Alberta of the East. Like it is really substantial, and so we really appreciate the consideration for the work that's being done here.
Thank you.
Mr. Vici, thank you to all our witnesses for your testimony, and we wish you the best for the rest of the day. And thank you very much for coming before our committee. At this time, members, we're going to suspend as we transition to our last panel for today. So welcome back, everybody. And with us today, we have the Association des Psychoéducatrices et
The Association of Psychoeducators.
Is the VP, Julie Mayette, as well as the President, Laurie Marquis. And I believe we're going to, and then we've got also with us via video conference, we have from the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada, Timothy Ross, who's the Executive Director. Oh, okay. And I understand that we do have now Miss McNeese is with us, and welcome. And we hadn't seen you earlier. So Miss McNeese is a partner with McCarthy Tétrault, and she is her field is competition, antitrust, and foreign investment. So with that, Ms. McNeese, are you ready for some opening remarks? Yes. Okay. So we'll start with you, and then we'll go to the Association, and then to the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada. Okay. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and honorable members of the committee. My name is Kate McNeese, and as the Honorable Chair has just said, I am a partner at the law firm of McCarthy Tétrault, practicing in competition, antitrust, and foreign investment. I thank you very much for inviting me to appear before you today. Before I begin my statements, I want to note that I'm appearing today in my capacity as an individual, and my views expressed today are my own and not those of my law firm or of any client of McCarthy Tétrault. However, my submissions today are informed by my experience advising clients on the application of the Competition Act to their commercial agreements, conduct, and mergers. In my view, a comprehensive, clear, and effective Competition Act is in the best interest of all stakeholders, including both consumers and the business community. Bill C-59, along with the amendments enacted in 2022 and 2023, presents a comprehensive vision for the future of the Act. I commend the government and this committee for their thoughtful approach to implementing meaningful competition law reform in Canada. In my remarks, I will highlight a few areas that I believe bear additional consideration. First, I believe there is more work to be done to right-size the merger control threshold set out in Sections 109 and 110 of the Act. Over the past 5 years, the significant majority of transactions notified to the Competition Bureau have been designated non-complex, meaning they are identifiable by the clear absence of competition issues. Calibrating these thresholds to capture more potentially problematic mergers, while reducing the administrative burden on both merging parties and the Bureau by excluding more mergers that clearly do not raise issues, should be a goal of any meaningful reform. Bill C-59 changes the size of transaction threshold to capture entities with significant sales into Canada, which is a step in the right direction. However, I suggest additional study to consider further calibration of these thresholds, including in particular an amendment to exclude from the party size calculation assets and revenues of a vendor that is divesting its entire interest in a business, which are plainly irrelevant to the merged party's financial position. Second, Bill C-59 introduces a disgorgement remedy for civil conduct that has been the subject of a tribunal order under Sections 75, 77, 79, or 90.1 of the Act. I believe that private actions under the Act will be an important complement to Bureau enforcement, and I understand this provision, or these provisions rather, are likely intended to incentivize use of these provisions. However, the creation of a new collective redress mechanism from whole cloth risks confusion and uncertainty when there is a simpler alternative. Section 36 of the Act currently allows for collective redress for damages where there has been a violation of one of the criminal provisions of the Act. I recommend this committee consider revising Bill C-59 to remove the proposed disgorgement provisions and instead allow private litigants to seek collective redress under Section 36 of the Act for conduct that has been the subject of a tribunal order concerning civil matters. Third, Bill C-59 introduces private actions, administrative monetary penalties, and financial remedies for conduct found to be contrary to Section 90.1 of the Act. I'm particularly concerned that, as drafted, these penalties could apply to agreements that would constitute mergers under Section 92 of the Act. It would cause significant uncertainty in transaction planning if mergers could be subject not only to Bureau review and remedies under Section 92, but also to AMPs, private actions, and potentially disgorgement or damages under Section 90.1. I urge the committee to explicitly exclude agreements and arrangements that constitute mergers for the purposes of Section 92 from the scope of Section 90.1 of the Act. Finally, I'm concerned by the Bureau's recent submission to this committee advocating for the inclusion of structural presumptions based on bright line concentration and market share tests in the text of Section 92. I caution the committee not to incorporate such a significant change in this bill without a careful study of the evidence supporting the magnitude of notified transactions that would be captured by the proposed thresholds and therefore be subject to a reverse burden, a consultation with a wide variety of stakeholders to understand the impact of such a change on merger activity, and a consideration as to whether the proposed tests, which are taken verbatim from the new December 2023 U.S. horizontal merger guidelines, are appropriate in the context of Canada's economy. While bright-line structural presumptions can be useful in providing direction to merging parties as to the likely treatment of a prospective transaction and potentially dissuading problematic transactions, in my view, they are most appropriately placed in enforcement guidelines as they are in the U.S. The assessment of competitive effects is necessarily a contextual one, and the more balanced approach taken in the current Bill C-59, which permits but does not require the tribunal to assign greater weight to evidence of concentration and market share, is the more appropriate course. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. McNeese. I'm sure there will be many questions. Now we'll hear from the Association des Psychoéducatrices et Psychoéducateurs and to the Vice President, Madame Maillet.
Donc, officiellement constitué en février 2022.
Well, officially established in February 22, our organization has a mandate to promote psychoeducation among the public, schools, workplaces, community, private or public organizations in the field of psychoeducation. The purpose of the association is to be there to defend the interests and rights of its members from the very beginning of course, taxes, everything else. Psychoeducation is a young profession created in Quebec between the 50s and 70s. School of Psychoeducation at Université Montréal was founded in 72, and to hold a title or classification as psychoeducator, you have to have either a master's degree in psychoeducation, be a member of the professional order of psychoeducators in Quebec, part of a grandfather clause, and be admitted by recognition of equivalencies. The fully understanding psycho difference other helping professions refer to the field of practice. Psychoeducation should be exempt from taxes in both Canada and Quebec, first of all, because psychotherapy carries out psychosocial interventions with a variety of clients, skills, knowledge, human behavior, as well as psychology. They help a diversity of clientele to reduce mental health, whether it's adults or children. Adaptation, depression, cognitive development, other difficulties, anger management, emotional management are all subjects of study and therapy. Hello. Well, I'd like to talk about why we should be exempt from these taxes, either in Quebec or in Canada. As my colleague, Madame Mallette, said, we offer to a number of clients, and the clientele that we have, of course, which was mentioned earlier, with Ms. Benz, I believe, a psychotherapist who appeared before you. This will reduce the waiting lists for mental health services, which, as we know, are a primary public health need in Canada as well as in Quebec. However, the taxing of psychoeducational services represents a real obstacle in referencing our services. For example, there's often a reluctance on the part of other professionals to refer their clients to us, because we're perceived as providing a more expensive service due to the lack of tax exemption, of course, which is not often an issue with our other professionals, psychologists, and various other subcategories in the field. And I can testify that the decision of a client to not seek services or help, even if it's a priority need with the individual because of their difficulties or the development of certain skills in the individual's development, is such that the professionals have a tendency to not refer to a psychoeducator. Now, exemption would help us to ease access to services. These are costs that are fairly significant when we work in psychoeducation. They would come out to about 5% of any service, and that can be very expensive, particularly for certain categories of client. Now, I'd like to discuss the experience and knowledge of our psychoeducators. We're very well versed in human relations and in our clinical practices. The definition is very, very similar to psychiatric counseling. Now, we could qualify, if you wish, in one of the categories of psychotherapies. But to do that, we'd have to modify the Excise Tax Act so that within the definition we would find therapeutic counselor or counseling. And this would avoid taxes. And Revenue Quebec, which of course has to follow the lead of CRA to exempt us. So we have a long road ahead of us in order to get to this objective. Thank you for your attention, and that's it. Thank you very much, Ms. Mayette and Marquis.
And Mr. Timothy Ross, please.
Thank you so much, and good evening, Mr. Chair, and thank you to yourself and to the members of the committee for the invitation to appear tonight. I would love to be there in person. However, I am in Fredericton for work, so I am appearing from Fredericton today, and I'm representing the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada, the national voice of the cooperative housing movement. Just a bit of co-op history for starters. Co-op housing is a very well-documented success story in Canada. For over 50 years, co-ops have been providing good quality, affordable homes owned and governed by the community members who live there. There are more than 2,200 housing cooperatives located in every province and territory, and co-ops are home to more than 250,000 Canadians. Co-ops offer at-cost housing, meaning housing charges are increased every year simply to cover the costs of maintaining buildings in a good state of repair and investing in the future. That's why co-op homes cost $400 to $500 less per month on average in Canada when compared to similarly aged apartments in the private rental market. Co-ops also offer greater security of tenure. There's no outside landlord who might sell or rent evict or unreasonably increase rents. And co-ops are inclusive by design, as almost all operate on a mixed income model, administering available rental assistance programs for a portion of households with low incomes. They build strong communities because co-op housing brings people together and they allow people to have a chance to have a say in how their housing is run. Now I have some remarks to offer related to the fall economic statement and implementation. First is related to the rental rebate. Bill C-59 proposes to extend the GST rebate to certain cooperative housing. We really do appreciate this policy change, as we know it will be directly passed on to households in need who occupy new co-op housing. And this is a big part of the power of co-op housing. The nonprofit community ownership model ensures co-op homes are affordable and remain affordable for generations to come. The co-op housing sector is also ready to build. We're ready to play a larger role in the housing crisis. And the fall economic statement also included some resources for the forthcoming co-op housing development program. This program was first made, a budget commitment was made in 2022 for the launch of a new cooperative housing supply program. And we are very much looking forward to the launch of this program. We heard recently from the minister at conference a couple weeks ago that the program is expected to launch in early 2024. We really do hope that is case because any further delay in the launch of the program is costly. There is a lost opportunity cost to that. I'd also like to just speak to the importance of acquisition in the National Housing Strategy set of programs. Between 2016 and 2021, Canada lost 370,000 homes rented at or below $1,000 per month. This happens through demolition, conversion to condo, or increasing rents at turnover, which leaves fewer and fewer affordable housing options. And unfortunately, we're actually losing more affordable housing supply than we're seeing built under current federal programs. So we recognize and welcome the recently announced Canada Rental Protection Fund, which is meant to start to stem the loss of affordable housing by enabling co-ops and nonprofits to buy rental housing and keep it affordable. And we do look forward to working with the federal government and our partners to expedite that fund's launch. Because so many renters are in precarious situations today, and housing cooperatives are ready to help. Last but not least, it also must be said unequivocally that we do need a fully funded for Indigenous, by Indigenous approach to the urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy. Is needed. It's much needed right away. There's a $4 billion commitment on the table. We know that that's not enough. And Indigenous people and communities across the country disproportionately experience housing need, and we do need to see a robust and dedicated response. This will help both address the housing crisis and advance reconciliation. So in conclusion, the co-op housing sector is ready to work closely with the public, private, and nonprofit sectors to build more of the housing we need. The cooperative housing movement in Canada is well established. It's proven to be very resourceful, passionate, and committed to a vision of co-op housing for all. And we believe that a housing system that works for all must include more cooperative homes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I look forward to questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ross, for your opening remarks, and to all our witnesses for your opening remarks. This is actually our fifth panel today of witnesses, and it shows I may have a little bias, but I think this is the hardest working committee on the Hill. And I think the members would agree to that. And because of that, we have many special guest MPs that have joined us because they want to break a record. And I understand for the Fall Economic Statement, this will be the most meetings that we've ever had for the Fall Economic Statement. So I got MP Daryl Sampson is here joining us.
Un plaisir d'être ici. Merci.
We got.
I'm glad to be here.
Come and join the table. We got MP Sebastien Lemire, and we have somebody who was a member of this committee, and we have MP Fast has come to join to break the record as we go through 20 hours of witness testimony here for the Fall Economic Statement. And yes, right, and Mr. Biddle is here, and you can join us at the table. So on that, we are going to get to the members' questions, and in this first round, each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask questions. We are starting with MP Morantz in this record-breaking effort.
Thank you, Mr. Just I want to clarify, so Mr. Leet here from World Energy, he couldn't be here either? Okay, just checking. I want to thank the witnesses for being here. Maybe I'll start with Ms. McNeese. Are you still with us there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Thank you for your testimony. I want to back it up a bit more to about 30,000 feet, though. Just on terms of general policy, we had just a few minutes ago Professor Vivek Dehagia from Carleton University here talking about serious productivity problems that Canada is having, and part of the issue he laid at the feet of foreign investment. I'm sorry, I can't see you on my screen here. I don't know if the technicians can put. I can't see her on my screen. I can't see her. She's not on the screen here. Oh, there you are. Okay. So I just like, the professor was saying was that
productivity in Canada is falling. A large part of that he laid at the feet of lack of foreign investment. We had Deputy Governor Rogers from the Bank of Canada recently refer to Canada being in the middle of a productivity emergency and to break the glass. I'm just wondering from your perspective, seeing from the perspective of the clients that you talk to, what you're seeing in terms of foreign investment, and what steps do you think from a legal perspective, a legislative perspective, the government could take to make foreign investment in Canada more palatable to investors from outside of the country?
Wow, that's a very 30,000 feet question that I'm afraid is a little bit above my pay grade. But my comments were restricted to the Competition Act, which is covered in Bill C-59, but I also deal a bit with the Investment Canada Act, which governs the review of foreign investment into Canada. So we've seen a number of changes under the Investment Canada Act as well. In the past year, Bill C-34 recently received royal assent and is not yet in force, but I think soon will be. I think the issue with foreign investment is a couple-fold. First, there's a great deal of regulatory uncertainty, I think, for foreign investors who are subject to the Investment Canada Act in terms of what will be required of them. The national security provisions of the Act are quite broad and being applied more broadly. So I think there's a bit of a lack of transparency in terms of what investors can expect, especially in areas which aren't sort of traditionally thought of as national security related. You know, you think of defense, you think of military, but increasingly we're looking at investments in critical minerals as being very important to Canada's national security, investments in critical infrastructure, and those categories are getting very broad. The current pending amendments that will come in force shortly implement a mandatory reporting regime for certain investments in critical areas, prescribed businesses that involve prescribed rights, but those will all be defined by regulation for which the business community and the bar have not seen any drafts. So there's a great deal of uncertainty right now as to sort of where the foreign investment regime is heading. Separately, I think I know that the Canadian government and a number of the people working in the civil service at ISED and other investment related arms of Canada, I know they're doing good work in reaching out to foreign entities who may have an interest in investing in Canada. So, you know, I've worked with a number of clients who have been the subject of that type of outreach and who have come to Canada, and we've worked with them in that context. So I know that work is being done. But I do think the more clarity we can get around the new amendments to the Investment Canada Act, the better from a foreign investment perspective.
Yeah, so in terms of, you mentioned regulatory uncertainty, what would be an example of a company looking to invest in Canada that would have to be approved under the foreign investment review laws? What would be an example of something that would be a hindrance to them or regulatory, something that was uncertain in the regulations that would cause them maybe to pause or to reconsider their investment?
So there are two types of processes under the Investment Canada Act that foreign investors may have to go through. One is what we call a net benefit test, which is for certain investments that exceed financial thresholds, they need to go through a pre-closing review and approval process that typically involves providing undertakings to the relevant minister. So there are two categories here. Non-cultural investments those reviews are done by the Minister of Industry, and the cultural investments are done by the Minister of Canadian Heritage. So there can be some uncertainty in terms of what undertakings will be required to demonstrate that an investment is of net benefit to Canada. It tends to be an iterative process. It involves consultations with a number of stakeholders. And the way the process is set up is you're dealing with the sort of civil service agency who then speaks to the decision maker rather than discussing directly with the decision maker. So there can be a bit of friction in that process, just sort of naturally. The other is the one I referred to previously, which is the national security process. I think the greatest uncertainty there is while we have guidelines as to how those provisions will be applied, there is this new mandatory regime that will be coming into force. But the scope of that application, the timing of those rules, all of that right now is completely uncertain. So that is also causing uncertainty for some of our clients.
Thank you. I just have a quick question for Mr. Ross. How serious is the shortage of co-op housing across the country?
Well, The shortage of cooperative housing is quite dire, as are all types of housing supply. We do have a housing supply crisis. Housing cooperatives in Canada make up less than 1% of the housing market. And a great deal of research suggests that at a minimum, Canada needs to at least double the supply of community and cooperative housing to catch up with OECD comparators and help to restore affordability for renters.
And just quickly on that point, I hate to interrupt because my time is just running out, but did you make the federal government aware of the shortage of co-op housing, and how long ago did you do that?
We have been very consistent in identifying the shortage of cooperative housing. I'm sorry, I'm getting some feedback in my headset. I'm not sure why that is, but it seems to be better now. Sorry about that. We have been very consistent in identifying the shortage of cooperative housing supply in Canada, actually for decades now. We have not seen a dedicated federal cooperative housing supply program since the early 1990s. And just on the point of productivity, since you were quite interested in earlier, if you would allow me to add, we recently commissioned some research completed by Deloitte that shows a causal connection between increasing investment in community and cooperative housing supply and linking that to productivity gains. So if we doubled the supply of community and co-op housing in Canada, we would see an astronomical jump in productivity amounting between 5.7 and 9.3%. And we've also found that investment would be non-inflationary as well. So there are good gains from investment in co-op and community housing.
Very interesting, but I think I'm getting the hook. So on to the next.
Yeah, we got on, and we're going to MP Weiler, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. It's much appreciated to have you appear today. This is not the fifth panel, it's the sixth panel that we're meeting today.
Better. Yeah, see?
And maybe first, before getting into questions, I just thought I'd mention that actually the first half of last year, Canada had the largest per capita foreign direct investment of any country in the world, and actually the third largest in gross foreign direct investment. But, of course, there's more that we need to do to increase productivity in Canada, get more investment opportunities. And I think a lot of the measures in Bill C-59 do just that. And I do want to direct my questions to Ms. McNeice. And thank you for your testimony to date, and particularly some of the suggestions that you brought forward. Because there's many changes that are made to the Competition Act as part of the Bill C-59, including in private litigation opportunities, a new variety of rights of action, lower leave tests for applications, and the introduction of administrative monetary penalties with awards for private litigants. And we know that a lot of these changes are being brought in because to date, the Competition Bureau has largely been the initiator of proceedings, but it only has so many resources to go around to do its work and prioritizes cases of national importance. So, Ms. McNeice, I was hoping you might be able to share your thoughts on how these changes might be able to improve competition in Canada overall.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think that's a great question. So as Mr. Weiler said, there's a number of changes largely expanding the rights of private access to many of the different provisions under the Act. So the way our Act is set up is it's relatively codified. So there are specific provisions for different types of conduct that could be seen as contrary to competition, and previously only certain of those rights, or only certain of those provisions have been subject to private rights of action for private litigants. They've been solely the purview of the Commissioner in a number of cases, and by and large, Bill C-56 and C-59 together have expanded private rights of action to most of those areas. As I said in my opening statements, I think that private rights of action are an important complement to the Commissioner of Competition's work. I think that, as you say, the Commissioner is or the Bureau is a body of limited resources, and there are ways that private litigants can help sort of fill the gap for competition enforcement. So I'm generally in favor of a lot of these changes. I do think it's important that the leave test was somewhat lowered in order to make this more accessible, because I think the previous test was very difficult to overcome in terms of having to be substantially affected in all of the business rather than now in part of the business, which I think makes a great deal of sense in terms of the fact that certain businesses have multiple business lines, and I don't think they should be barred from potentially addressing a harm to one business line if it isn't sort of all of their business. So I'm generally in favor of these. I do think that we'll have to see how these leave tests are interpreted. I think the public interest branch of the leave test is sort of a new concept for Canadian competition law. So I'd be looking to the Competition Bureau to consider how they might be supporting assessments that certain actions taken by private litigants may be in the public interest, or maybe some guidance from the tribunal, either through litigated cases or elsewise, as to how that will be interpreted in light of existing jurisprudence and sort of analogous areas. So I think we're all very curious to see how that's going to work. But overall, I do think that this will increase the number of means that potentially affected parties may have to address competition concerns, and subject to the leave test and appropriate pleading standards to sort of pluck out vexatious litigants. We don't want that, but I do think an expansion of private access is warranted and is a positive aspect of Bill C-59.
Very much so, and I think I have some ideas for questions to ask the Competition Bureau when we have them come up here before committee on this legislation. As well. And some of the other changes to this legislation revolve around the extension of the timelines for the review of mergers, and also the structural inference that you brought up earlier in your testimony. And you mentioned the work needed to be done to right-size the merger control threshold. And I was hoping you might be able to speak a little bit more to what you meant by that.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different topics. I'll take them in turn. So number one, the Bill C-59 does change the limitation period for mergers, specifically as it applies to mergers that are not notified to the commissioner. So it extends that period from 1 year to 3 years. And I think there is some sense in doing so. In my experience, Bureau investigations for mergers that the Bureau believes do potentially harm competition or lead to an SPLC, which is the legal standard, do take quite a bit of time. There's a lot of information gathering. There's a lot of analysis. There's a lot of submissions sort of going back and forth and gathering that sort of information. In a case where the limitation period is only 1 year for a non-notified merger, the Bureau may simply not have time to conduct that analysis, which may lead to them sort of rushing a case to the tribunal to try to catch it before the limitation period, which may not be the most efficient way to address these issues, or simply may run out of time. So it's not clear to me how many of those mergers have been missed or rushed or caught. I'd be interested in hearing the sort of magnitude of this issue. But to the extent that is perceived as an issue, I think a 3-year period is sort of a sensible extension. It's bringing us back to what the limitation period was prior to the 2009 amendments to the Act. We wouldn't want it to go too long, because sort of as time goes by from a merger, it's much harder to pin effects in a market to the merger itself rather than to other structural considerations. So I wouldn't want to extend that, but I think that's a fairly limited and sensible amendment. To my comments about the merger control thresholds, I don't think any merger control threshold is going to be perfect. If you're setting out sort of asset and revenue-based thresholds, or even a market share threshold, which some jurisdictions have, you're always going to be capturing some mergers that are not problematic, and you're always going to be missing some mergers that are problematic. What I would recommend is just taking a look and trying to figure out whether our thresholds as they currently exist, the $93 million size of transaction threshold, the $400 million size of parties threshold, are they capturing many mergers? Are we missing a lot of mergers? Are we capturing, as I said in my statements, I think between 65 and 75% a year of the mergers that are notified to the Competition Bureau are non-complex or characterized by not having any competition issues. So with that number so high, is there a way that we can exclude certain of those non-problematic mergers from notification?
Thank you.
I don't have the answers as to...
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. You've just gone over time. Thank you, MP Weiler. And now over to MP Lemire, please.
Président, je viens de passer au moins les 2 dernières années dans le dossier du sport.
I've been in the sports field for a couple of years, and I've just seen a number of abuses going on in those situations. And of course, just to stress and the need for underlining the need for these psychosocial services, mental health, counseling, and it is quite useful and often used in sports fields. We need to have therapeutic professionals, but in Quebec, they have to seek authorization for another body in order to see if the equivalencies are adequate in order to recategorize. So province to province, province to federal, and it's very laborious, time-consuming. Now, if the professionals in Quebec could address themselves to the authorities in New Brunswick because it's a bilingual province, and we could see what their criteria are for accreditation or registration and the discerning of a title. Is there any modifications that could be done to resolve that situation and to facilitate the recognition of qualifications and certifications? Therefore, your services would be less expensive and more accessible. Well, that's a very pertinent question. I think the community of psychoeducators and psychotherapists in Quebec are in agreement that we should facilitate and ease by way of loosening up taxes, if you will, so to begin to not harmonize necessarily, but to level the playing field from province to province in Canada. It doesn't mean that there are no psychoeducators in New Brunswick or somewhere else in the country. They do practice professionally everywhere in Canada. But it's a bit more difficult if there were more professional orders in Canada, professional societies. We don't really see the significance, the pertinence of comparing ourselves to another province when psychoeducational practitioners are quite competent and have a lot of experience. So this expertise, this knowledge, this tradecraft exists elsewhere in Canada. Nonetheless rigorous. We're dealing with professionals who have a master's, so they've taken some other courses, and they have to follow a practice or protocol of ongoing continuous education. They have to go back to school every 2 years, not to requalify, but to keep abreast of methodology, whatever. And it's quite complicated in Canada because you also have public sector insurance programs and private sector insurance programs. Well, that's a very good explanation, and I understand the difficulty of recognition for your profession. People come to see you, they have problems, they have issues, and for example, if they have to integrate into the school system, but the government is earning tax revenue on the backs of those who can least afford it. Well, no, that's not appropriate, but it's like any other qualified professionals. Ergotherapy, acupuncturist, it goes from chiropractic to naturopathy. We deal with people who are suffering, and the waiting lists are so long in order to access these services, psychotherapy, counseling. People have to delay seeking help, and it's not helping. well, I could have used the word ethics, if you will, but there's inequities among these various categories. It's basically it's the same field, mental health, services, various techniques and methodologies. How's it organized? Are people independent agents? Are they grouped into clinical groups? I'm not sure if we had any data of that nature in our brief, but I'll give you a partial answer. Private practice is on the rise currently. And of course, the demand is rising as well for professional services. Well, we can't, you know, the supply does not match the demand right now. And a lot of people are seeking out help on the private sector. Some are salaried, as in a hospital, for example, and some are in private clinics. But I should give you a little bit of nuance here. Clinically, psychotherapy is absolutely essential. It's given as the cure, if you will, or a therapy that would be remedy a situation. But there's a reluctance to refer to a specialist.
Concluez, Monsieur le Président, mais je trouvais.
Well, I would like to ensure that we get a response in writing to get a more fulsome detail.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ross, I'd like to direct some questions to you if I could. Bill C-59 would make cooperative housing corporations that meet certain prescribed conditions eligible for the 100% GST rebate for new purpose-built rental housing. Can I get your views on whether the conditions that are described are appropriate?
Generally, yes. Officials have been in contact with our policy team at CHF Canada, and we are optimistic that the exemptions will be in place for cooperatives and cooperative developers as we're building new cooperative housing supply.
Now, it might be a tough question, but just generally, I'm trying to get a sense of the quantum of the impact of this. Like, what quantitative impact do you think this measure will have on the construction of new purpose-built rental housing cooperatives across Canada?
There are a few ways you could look at that. One would be just by reducing the end cost that this rebate makes more projects viable and able to go forward. So because with the current interest rates, very high costs of supply, labor, and property, it's very hard to meet the economic conditions needed to go forward. So this does induce, we hope that this does induce projects to be more viable and get greenlit to go forward from a financial perspective. The other way to quantify this is looking at the absolute reduction in the end cost of delivering a unit. And for the federal rebate, that can be tens of thousands of dollars. Because many provinces have come on board.
Is that per unit?
Per unit, yes, on a per unit basis. And because provinces are also coming on board, that often increases substantially as well based on the provincial rebate too. So those tens of thousands of dollars knocked off the delivery price means a more economic and more affordable housing charge or rent structure for the initial occupants, and that affordability grows over time because of the cooperative model delivering more stable housing overall.
Now, C-59 also enacts the Department of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Act, which transfers part of the federal housing portfolio to the Office of Infrastructure Canada. What impact, if any, do you believe this reform will have on public infrastructure and housing outcomes in your sector?
I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. I have heard some of the intent and rationale of this reorganization as creating more alignment between communities and infrastructure, and because housing development is often so connected to infrastructure, that alignment does make sense from a conceptual perspective. Many of the same powers or sort of the general duties and powers of the minister remain fairly consistent, but it remains to be seen what material impact this will have. I guess only time will tell.
Now, in my riding of Vancouver Kingsway, we still benefit from the renaissance of co-op housing built in the 70s and 80s. It was a federal program. I've got Trout Lake, Caslow Gardens, Still Creek. There's an Indigenous co-op. There's Flesher. And literally thousands of people still benefit from that. I'm just wondering, this may be before your time, but what was it that made the federal government's co-op program in the 70s and 80s that resulted in tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of co-op units being built then? How can we make that happen today when we have a housing crisis? What do we need to do to replicate that situation from then?
I think what was effective in those programs in the 70s and 80s, which were supported by multiple governments, it goes back to the significant level of investment, and the significant level of investment that's not just a 1, 2, or 3 year program, but multi-year programs, so that you can really plan ahead. Those programs featured financing and capital contributions in the form of either grants or operating subsidies. The other feature that was quite exceptional about these legacy programs is they also offered rental assistance to low-income households, so that there were actually rental assistance and rental subsidies available to make housing cooperatives and nonprofits even more inclusive and be able to meet the housing needs of low and more vulnerable households, low-income and vulnerable households, excuse me.
Are we doing those today? Are we pursuing those same programs today at the federal level?
Well, if you look at the federal supply programs, there are a few federal programs that are contributing to new nonprofit and cooperative housing supply, though not at the quantum that we saw in the 70s and 80s. 25% of all new rental construction starts in those decades were attributable to co-op and nonprofit housing development. Now it's much lower today. We do have some hope that the forthcoming co-op housing supply program will be quite welcome as a dedicated supply program. However, it has taken quite some time to launch that program because the budget commitment was first made in 2022 in a housing crisis. It would be great to see faster implementation of budget commitments.
Thank you, MP Davies. And, members, just like we did in the last panel, we've got limited time. We did start a little bit late here with this panel of witnesses, so we are going to go 1-2 minutes for each party. We're going to start off with MP Morantz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ross, I wanted to circle back because we were getting into something I thought was quite interesting around the correlation between productivity in the country and the development and construction of co-op housing units. Would it be fair to say that the low productivity in relation to, for example, the United States correlates to fewer cooperative housing projects being built in Canada?
Thanks for the question. What the research suggested it was not a correlation, but actually causation between investment in new co-op and nonprofit housing supply and an increase in productivity levels. So at the rate recommended, the recommendation is to at least double the supply of community and cooperative housing in Canada to restore a level of affordability and to catch up with OECD comparators. And it's not just the construction that supports the productivity. It's at the household level the effect of having an affordable and safe place to call home that's connected to community. Because once you have that economic relief of actually having an affordable place to call home, it actually induces economic behaviors that support greater productivity outcomes. That's what the research demonstrates.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
Now we are going to MP Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Voss. I'm going to stay with you. It's interesting in my riding of St. John's East, there traditionally have not been a lot of cooperative housing, even though this is a model that I support. But since the GST link for the new cooperative bills, there's been energy among the groups and really wanting to come together and seize the moment and say, spread the word on how important cooperative housing is to a full and robust housing strategy that really does ensure that no one is left behind. So do you feel that moving this legislation forward, Bill C-59, is important to growing the cooperative movement and the building of cooperative housing in Canada?
Certainly, particularly the GST rebate helps, as I said earlier, either ensure that development projects become viable because of the challenging economic conditions we're all facing, or that what is developed is more affordable to the end user. So that's very much welcome in the legislation. But what also needs to happen is the timely launch of the Cooperative Housing Development Program, first committed to in Budget 2022. We did hear from ministers that the expected launch of that program is early 2024. I hope that we can see that happen very soon, because every day that goes by, costs continue to rise, and we need to lock in construction projects now. We, in our industry, we know that there are about $1 billion worth of fundable construction starts for cooperative housing development in 2024, 2025. And that development program is needed to support those projects in going forward.
And now we're going to MP Lemire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ma question est pour...
My question is for Ms. McNeil. C-59 looks at the revision or update of the Competition Act. Do you think we're going far enough? Could we go further? Are there other elements that perhaps we might propose in another bill? Perhaps it's too little too late. We could think of communications, for example. It seems to be Loctite, not quite competitive. We could have had more robust measures to improve the competitive stance of Canada. There are some monopolies which are completely against the interests of the consumer. Pardon me.
Personal view, I think that Bill C-59 is, along with a number of the other reforms that have come in the last couple of years, is quite comprehensive and really does represent a sea change in the approach to competition enforcement. I think that this does go far enough. I think there are a number of questions that this bill raises, or that the sort of collective changes to the Competition Act have raised in terms of how enforcement will play out, how some of these private actions will increase enforcement, or what is addressed, or how they address them. I personally am in the view that we should let these amendments sort of sit in place and settle, and see if we get some more clarity as to how courts would interpret the law and how the Bureau has interpreted the law, greater guidance, so that our business communities can understand what this new version of the Competition Act means, and ensure that they are sort of modeling their practices to comply with it.
Merci.
So,
Lemire. Now this will be our final questioner today. It's I know it's MP Davies, and you're going to share your time.
I will cede my time to
you're
Mr.
ceding
Morris.
your time, okay, to MP Morris. So
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Davies. In my community, we've got years-long wait lists for limited co-op housing units, and Mr. Ross has spoken already about this commitment that was 2 years ago, $1.5 billion, the first time in 30 years, a new investment to build co-op housing, but the money hasn't actually been spent yet. And I know that there are thousands of shovel-ready projects that CHF Canada wants to move ahead with. Mr. Ross, could you talk about the impact that these delays on commitment to spending funds is having on projects to get deeply affordable co-op housing built across the country?
Thanks for the question. There are a few ways that delays in getting to funding commitments can affect projects and outcomes for a program like this. One, between the date of the budget commitment and now we saw several interest rate increases. So the cost of borrowing is going up. We know that the cost of supply, labor, and property are also quite significant as well and continuing to rise. So as time goes by and costs of delivering new units goes up, the actual purchasing power of that budget commitment is diminished, unfortunately. So we do recognize. I know it does take time to get things from a budget commitment to a point of implementation and launch, but we would really hope to see the program launch as soon as possible.
Yeah, thanks for your advocacy. It shouldn't take 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Morris. And we want to, on behalf of the Finance Committee, I want to thank our witnesses for coming before us. We have a lot of people here that were listening to your testimony, the clerk, the analyst, the interpreters that were doing a wonderful job. And all of that has been captured to be able to be part of our report. So thank you for your recommendations and your many answers to the many questions from the members. And we wish you an excellent evening for the rest of the day. Thank you very much, and members, we're adjourned.